Rivalry Show, Sophie Freedom, and you're watching My Freedom Ring.
Break. Back in 1993, when a guy by the name of Bill Shaw gave me the opportunity to really lead WCW to where I thought it could be and should be, I got a tremendous break. And I owe a lot to Bill Shaw, and I owe a lot to this company, and I owe a lot to the employees.
And I'm back. And better than ever, 'cause I'm back. And welcome to Wrestle Squabble. Tonight, we are here to talk about it. Man, you have Dark Side of the Ring producing episodes on Who Killed WCW. There's been a lot of stuff on WCW documentaries that come out, but a new one's coming out. This man is also very active on social media and platforms like this, but we are talking about Eazy-E, Eric Bischoff. And Bobby, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, man. You know, getting into Bischoff, it's gonna be interesting because you either love him or you hate him, and the internet is on both sides of the fence, specifically with Eric Bischoff. More now so than ever with him just trolling people on Twitter. He's rather entertaining follow.
Absolutely. He's always been able to keep himself relevant, and I find Eric Bischoff incredibly entertaining. And some of the stuff he says, I agree with, not everything. But man, did he have a hell of a career though when you really think about it? And let's get into it a little bit, just from the wrestling side. Eric Bischoff kind of starts his career in AWA under Vern Gagne. Sorry there. I believe it, and this is kind of what it this is from the pictures from the 83 weeks. I don't think there's a lot to say here. We obviously did not grow up watching the AWA. But do you have any thoughts on his time getting kind of his foot in the door? He might have done some other things like, he was from, this is in Minnesota. And I don't know, any thoughts to him? Just, that's a good place to start.
Yeah, it's his whole career is serendipitous, right? It's a happening chance, right? He just went there to sell that shooting star game. I don't know if you ever listened to 83. He talks about it a couple times. There's like this game, like laser tag, you throw shooting stars and they stick to each other, and that's how you beat them. And he was just going there to sell that and get some TV time, and got brought in somehow. And they're like having him around, and then he just happened to have a suit jacket as everyone's leaving the door because he's there from 86 to 91 when it closes, basically. So he just happens to outlast everyone there, and they're like, okay, here's your break.
Yeah, and from some of the documentaries talked about him and his wife, and he's still with his wife. They had their kids. They weren't making a ton of money at this time.
No.
They really barely making ends meet. So this kind of story of how he really grows from here is kind of fascinating in a lot of ways.
Gave him a shot at he got a shot the WWF at the time.
Well, I want to talk about that. So then, when you talk about Eric Bischoff, he does get an audition to be an announcer with the World Wrestling Federation. There are clips of this, and you can hear Vince kind of talking to him in the background. I think he asked him who his hero is in this, and he says Hulk Hogan, who was obviously the hottest thing in WWF at the time. But in the audition, as you can see right there, he's holding a broom. And Vince McMahon told him to interview the broom. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on his audition and the way he's kind of talked about it over the years?
So this is also a time when Tony Schiavone actually starts at WWE right around the same time. He has a small stint there. I'm wondering if he lost out to Schiavone. But like when you hear the video, he's just not buying it, and that made me feel like if you're Vince at that time, this guy doesn't get it, right? Like he hasn't been here long enough. I don't know. That's just what it felt like to me, because he's like, oh, this broom is the best or whatever. And it's like, that time period is just like, it was probably a good kick in the pants for him that this wasn't just going to be handed to him.
Absolutely. I mean, the footage that they showed when he says, who's your hero? He says Hulk Hogan.
It's ridiculous.
That's kind of lame. That was kind of lame. And then when you're asked to interview the broom, obviously they're not you gotta sell it. They were seeing what he could do, I believe, when it's time to improvise.
Yeah, it's like Jordan Belfort when he says, "Sell me this pen." You know what I mean?
Yeah,
From Wall Street.
and it sounds like, Eric kind of took offense to that later, as people had said in the backgrounds of WCW. I haven't heard him speak on this,
He's
but I
never
will
really said
say,
anything bad, right? About it. I've never, and I listened to 83 Weeks consistently. I don't think he's ever really said anything bad about it. I think he just thought it was a learning experience. He's not very negative about things. That's something that we'll talk about throughout his career that he gets blamed for, but it doesn't sound like he has a look back of negativity.
no, I would say that too. Like, he's very, I think he's very fond memories of just his career. Now, we'll talk about some of the things that weren't so great that he did during his career, but I would have not hired him either, based on the footage that I saw too. When you're interviewing for a job for the World Wrestling Federation, which is the biggest company at the time, and yeah, I don't think he nailed I don't think he nailed it.
No, I should do some research to see if that was him and if Schiavone's the one to beat him out there, because Tony Schiavone did like the DVD stuff and like that during that time period.
But he does end up getting a job with WCW, as Eric Bischoff likes to say, as a C-level C Show announcer, because they had multiple shows. So he gets brought in. I kind of remember him coming in because I would watch a little bit of WCW at the time in '93, and he was not really on television all that much.
Yeah, no, he's I've watched more WCW from this time period over the last 4 or 5 years because of 83 Weeks. That he's like that guy you kick it to, right? Like, he's not commentating. He's the person you go to, say, "Hey, we're gonna talk to this person or that person." He's just kind of doing that, which, yeah, it's a C-level announcer. It's someone who you may not even remember a couple years down the line. Like, this could have been a flash in the pan if he didn't catch on as his career develops.
Yeah, I mean, and at this point, I believe, is it Bill Watt is kind of going out the door, and they're trying to figure out who is going to be, because ends up the president. But no, was it Bill Shaw? Maybe it was Bill Shaw. I'm not sure exactly.
Bill Watts is going out at the beginning of his like run in the middle, and then Bill Shaw takes over, right? And then it gets to him. So it is that weird transition for WCW. They're not making money. Ted Turner is just spending money like Tony Khan on a wrestling promotion that's doing nothing.
Yeah, it's at this point, it's kind of just, hemorrhaging money. And it didn't really matter to Ted Turner because he was a billionaire. So
he owned it. Yeah, he didn't care. It was losing money, but it was TBS's highest rated show at the time. So it's still bringing in viewership. I know at this time, at this time, wrestling itself is not great advertising wise, but it's still generating profit on the books for Ted Turner's side. Just WCW itself was losing.
Well, wrestling was always highly rated on those stations. So
yeah.
No, but so he kind of gets Ric Flair likes to take a lot of credit, saying that he said that that was the guy they should look at, but he ends up getting the job, and he gets all the way up to senior president of WCW, and now he's starting to get himself on TV. He starts changing things. This is where they start using Disney for WCW Saturday Night. They're saving money by not going around to film. And they always have an audience. At this point, you have WCW Saturday Night, you had the morning show, and he's just trying to come up with ideas. This is where he starts bringing in, this is where he really doesn't want WCW to be that Southern brand. Because even today, I talk to people from the South. I talk to a lot of wrestling fans all over the country. And a lot of them, we always watched WWF. Even when it was the Monday Night War, we were WWF fans. In we were wrestling fans, but WCW was second. He wanted to get away from that Southern-based mentality, and that's where he hires Gene Okerlund and Bobby the Brain Heenan, and I believe in '93, to start changing the way that it's viewed. And what do you think of those ideas?
It makes sense because it looked like those guys just ran their course in WWE. It had just been time. They've been there for over 10 years at that point, right? So it's smart to bring in people that are looking for a lighter schedule. They're going to be based in one location. They have to travel all the time, and they have facial recognition with the audience. So it's a smart move, And I know that you can go back and see people crapping. Dave Meltzer loved to crap on them when they were in Disney, but that was a smart move for a company that was losing money.
You could always have an audience ready to go. And you didn't, not a lot of travel, kind of like what they do with NXT now.
Right.
So he was kind of ahead of the time on that. I mean, TNA did it for years when they were just filming in one location. The Impact.
Yeah, I will say, though, between TNA and what NXT does, it's different than what they were doing at MGM because they couldn't advertise. You couldn't tell them that you were going to be having a wrestling show. So they were getting crowds who didn't really know. So you might get people who are cheering for bad guys and all this other stuff, and you're really having to tell the audience what to do almost.
No, absolutely. But he's making good moves. I do think WWF doesn't respond well to losing Gene Okerlund and Bobby Brain Heenan. I mean, they brought in Todd Pettengill, if you remember that, and I don't think he filled the shoes as well as Gene Okerlund. And when they lost Heenan over time, they had to start getting new announcers, right? Who does he decide? He puts Macho Man there.
Yeah, but they brought over Jim Ross too in '93, right? So it's also a little bit different.
Jim Ross is not there very long.
But I know, but I'm saying that during this time period, though, it's not that they lost them; it's that Mean Gene, he has even said that he just thought it was time for him to go. So it wasn't like WWE could even kept him.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense to bring them in. Yeah, I agree. Jim Ross does come in, but he quickly exits in '93. I remember seeing it in the WWF magazine because I knew who Jim Ross was when he debuted at WrestleMania 9 because I'd see him on WCW. And it was weird seeing him on WWF. And then on the flip side, it was very weird seeing Mean Gene Okerlund and Bobby the Brain Heenan on WCW. That was kind of like the start. Like I'd already seen Jake Roberts go to WCW for a little bit, and then British Bulldog had been there, and that felt weird. And then in WWF at this point, like Lex Luger's now in WWF. It's like very weird. Like this whole like jumping ship stuff was already really going on pre Monday Night Wars.
Yeah, '93 was a real transitional year for professional wrestling.
I mean, Ric Flair was on WWF television. That was wild.
And he was gone by early 1993 and back to WCW. And you got Luger who's coming in, and he's going to be there for a little bit. It's just like one of those time periods where it just seems like a lot of people's contracts were up at the same time. Jake Roberts was, in 92 when he was in WCW. He wasn't even there that long.
He had a falling out, and he went there, and it didn't last long. But it was weird seeing him there.
Yeah.
So as a child, I didn't really understand how the wrestling business worked. I just kind of made sense. But like seeing those guys was always like, oh my God, the British Bulldog is in WCW.
Yeah. Actually, Jake the Snake might have been in and out by the time like he came in before Bischoff even took over and gone before Bischoff is.
Yeah, he was not there. He was not there very long.
I figured there's a whole thing about it. You can figure it out.
But he makes like the biggest move that he's going to make, which is obviously signing Hulk Hogan. And this is just kind of like, this is the face of WWF. He had retired. He was filming Thunder in Paradise at this point. And, he was a free agent. If he wanted to get back into wrestling, he wasn't going back to WWF. He already had the steroid trial and everything. There was bad blood there. Hogan, he was noticeably smaller at this point because he had stopped doing a lot of that, the steroids and stuff like that. And I remember in '94 on WCW Saturday Night, this is before like the internet where you knew someone was coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And I was watching WCW Saturday Night and they said WCW had just signed Hulk Hogan. And I was like, oh my God. Because when I first started watching wrestling, Hulk Hogan was the number one guy in WWF. Then it went to Bret Hart. But the void of Hulk Hogan not being there was so felt in wrestling. It didn't feel right to have Hulk Hogan not in wrestling. What did you think of this signing?
It's the smart move, right? Yeah, it's a big move, right? Because the reason that you could get him is because you were on the same studio set. So, Ric Flair takes a lot of credit for this as well.
Flair's out there taking credit for Kurt Angle signing with WWF now.
Yeah, it's yeah, he is. But it's a great signing. It's a smart move. It's a smart business. I will say Hulk Hogan did say, I don't know how recent, that he told Vince McMahon when he left in '93 that he would never compete against him. And this is him directly showing he's a liar and going out there and signing with WCW and showing up. I think this is, I know '95 is really when they launched Nitro, is really where competition started. I still feel like this is really the starting line of the competition between WCW and WWE.
I think this is where Vince McMahon said, now I have real competition because they have our number one star. They debut him to wrestle Ric Flair, the match that they did not do in WWF, which we're sitting here today saying, I can't believe that match didn't happen. You know, a lot of people said, well, the house shows
Yeah.
weren't drawing. I find that very hard to believe because you had
I
the
don't believe
Southern
it,
and
yeah.
Northern Star in the same company, and you never had them headline a pay-per-view.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's an NDA out there that Hogan wouldn't job to Flair or Flair wouldn't job to him, and that's what happened. Because I have a feeling this is gonna be like what we talked about a couple of years. Like we're saying that we missed the window with Roman and Rock if they don't end up having a match. They should have headlined WrestleMania. It didn't matter if it drew or not. That's the moment that you wanted to have. WrestleMania 8, it has this stupid dual main event. The world title doesn't even go on last. It's just like, what are you doing? It's actually, I would say that WrestleMania is the cornerstone going towards the failure of what wrestling is going to be for 93, 94, 95.
No, I agree. I mean, like, how do you not do that match? I mean, literally, the two stars of the 80s are the two different companies, and they're in their early, I think Hogan and Flair are like 43, 44 when he signs. A couple years, they're already in their 40s. Like, if
Yeah.
you had those two guys, you had that, like, how do you just not do that match? How do you just say, like,
Yeah.
nope, that's not the match we're going to do?
I don't think we'll ever know the real truth. And the things that are out there, I don't believe. That's just BS that the house draw. If it, a house show versus a pay-per-view are two totally different things. Like, I'm sorry, you might not draw in Indiana, but if you put Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan on pay-per-view for a national audience, it's going to draw things. So something else happened, and they'll never tell us what happened.
Well, so when they get him in 94, they don't waste any time.
Nope.
They don't waste any time. He wrestles Ric Flair on the first night. Probably, I think, the biggest pay-per-view they ever did. They rolled out Mr. T. They rolled out Shaq. And now WCW feels like, holy crap, they have the biggest star in all of wrestling in the number 2 promotion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, looking back at that was really wild as a kid to think, because I think, Hogan, like, I started watching wrestling and Hogan was there for like 2 years and then he was gone.
Yeah.
Now I could watch him on rarely on Saturday nights, but it was just good to have Hogan back in wrestling.
Yeah, it would have been nice if Tony Khan had watched this and did the same thing with Edge. Bringing in Edge and just put the belt right on him.
Yeah, well, that's a whole nother thing, and again, we'll talk about.
Not to get, yeah. Sorry, it's just hard not to compare Bischoff and Tony Khan, especially with the feuds that go on Twitter recently.
Yeah, I mean, Edge may be one of the biggest stars. It's hard, but Hogan really is the Babe Ruth of professional wrestling. There's no doubt he's the biggest star.
Yeah,
even today, more people know who Hulk Hogan is than John Cena, and that's gonna last for a little while until we all die out. So
yeah, and I don't know. Hulk Hogan has a very bad stigma now, so I don't know if the people who know Hulk Hogan are remembering him from wrestling or what happened with him going viral.
But to just speaking in '94, like, if you didn't know anything about wrestling, you knew Hulk Hogan and you knew that's what he did.
Yep.
So legitimize their company like that. Yep. So they have Hogan for a bit, and then they say, "Hey, we have the star power," and they roll out WCW Monday Nitro, which Bischoff says one of the first things Ted Turner said. He's like, "What do you want? What would you want to do?" And he said, "Give me prime time," and they went with Monday nights. And talk about gutsy. There's plenty of nights during the week they could have had this show.
Yeah.
And they decided they were going to go head to head with the World Wrestling Federation. On the first episode, this is before the NWO. This is a year before the NWO. Lex Luger's contract quietly ends in WWF, and they bring out Lex Luger the replacement for Hogan in WWF was supposed to be. He shows up on Monday Nitro, and looking back at the Monday Night Wars series, Raw was preempted probably by the Smith Winston whatever dog show, so they weren't even on. So Nitro got to premiere, not even going head to head with WWF, and they're rolling out a debut of a big star who was just wrestling with the other company, and that's their first show.
Yeah, isn't this right after the King of the Ring? Like the King of the Ring was that Sunday night, and on Monday night he's on Nitro.
No, because it debuted in September.
Oh, okay. So, but that's when his contract ended. It was in that time period.
Yeah, it was. He and Lex Luger said he didn't give a 2-week notice. Contract was just up, and he stayed quiet about it. And they didn't know. They didn't know his contract was up. That's what they say in the interviews. That's kind of. I feel like they gave up on Lex Luger because at the time he left WWF, his star power had really faded.
Yeah, in all fairness, Diamond Dallas Page has spoken about this. Diamond Dallas Page is the one who brought Lex Luger into WCW by going to Bischoff and saying Lex Luger won't be a problem. Lex Luger had become a cancer within the locker room at this time period. So I don't think WWE was all that hurt seeing Lex Luger show up. It's a cool rating for an opening show, especially when you're not going against a live WWE. But I don't think at this moment that WWE is losing sleep over Lex Luger. You know what I mean?
Well, no, maybe not. But I think Lex goes on to do his best work of his career in this run.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
because they gave him a contract that Bischoff said he didn't think he would take.
Right.
And they ended up paying him more money later because he proved that he was worth it.
Yeah. I will say, though, his 80s, early 90s run is still pretty good, which brought him to WWE, Lex Luger.
No, I do, but I that's good too. And I know he's the world champion, but I think his overall,
his most memorable stuff is in this run.
And so they're off and running. And I kind of, this is a little out of order, but at this time period too, we're going to get to the NWO in a second, but they do start bringing in, older WWF stars. One is the Macho Man who, WWF had decided we're not going to have him wrestle anymore. I think about the matches he could have had with Bret Hart or Shawn Michaels and a list of others. Why do you think Vince thought he was done?
I just think that he was going a different direction, and rolling out Macho Man wasn't going to do it anymore. And if he kept rolling him out, at this point he would have been the biggest star left next to Bret Hart. I just think that there are matches where Macho Man doesn't look great during his run in WCW.
He's wearing a shirt at the end, and then when he gets to WCW, he's not wearing a shirt now.
Yeah, so he starts to come back and do it and find his own. I guess he just thought he wasn't done. I don't know. Yeah, you could have had stuff with HBK. It's just such a different locker room. There's a huge gap between, Macho Man's a baby boomer, right? And then you got Generation X coming up. So it's just kind of maybe it just didn't work for whatever reason.
I think it was a bad idea. I think you could do the new generation without losing the old stars because they'd even told Flair they're going to push him down the card. I still think you could have made stuff work with those guys and had the new generation.
Maybe it had to do with the steroids allegation, though, dude. Like maybe it was the fact that he just represented that time period. Even though I don't think Macho Man, I'm not saying Macho Man was a steroid user. I'm just saying he was a person from that time period, and they just were like, we just want to move on from all this.
That I do understand. I mean, as you can see, when he goes to WCW, he again makes it even more legit. And this is where they're saying this is where the big boys play because we have the stars. We have the star power that is lacking in WWF right now. WWF is making new stars, which they were very good at.
Yes.
WWF has always been good at making new stars. WCW never mastered that. So, I mean, but he'd take anybody, Big Boss Man would come over. IRS would come over. Bret Hart eventually comes. We'll talk about that. But in this time period, if you had anything WWF, they were willing to take. Hacksaw Jim Duggan was there. And these weren't main event caliber guys. But if you had that WWF appeal, they wanted you. I think part of getting rid of that Southern appeal to the company.
That's other wrestling.
Yeah, I mean, that's just kind of how I see what they were
Yeah.
doing. Not a bad move. And this is what's cool about today's wrestling again, is like now with you have two companies, you have two places for people to work, and it's not just one company that can have all the stars.
Yeah, no, it's better for business. It's better for the people in the business, right? That's the bottom line. And Macho Man moving over there just added more credibility. It was a smart move. Macho Man must have started dollar signs too. Like,
I think he just wanted to
just
wrestle.
jump.
I think
Yeah.
they were going to pay him, and he still wanted to wrestle. His career wasn't over to him. You know, it's more common to see wrestlers wrestling into their 40s now, but it was
Yeah.
going on back then too.
Yeah.
So they're rolling with Nitro for a while, and it's kind of they're going back and forth in the rings, but like Nitro wasn't great right off the bat because it really was just the older guys, you know, Ric Flair versus Macho Man every other week, Hogan versus Flair, the Dungeon of Doom and Hogan. And the fans in that audience were the Southern fans. They weren't Hulk Hogan guys, they were Ric Flair guys. And the audience starts to sour on Hulk Hogan a little bit. And then Wyndham's chasing his tail right now. At this point, it's time to roll with something new. And the first thing Bischoff does is he goes and he pays a lot of money to two of the WWF's top stars. You had Diesel, Kevin Nash, who was the WWF champion for almost a year, maybe a year. You had Razor Ramon, who was multiple time Intercontinental champion, really the king of the mid card / main event of WWF. So you have two like really big stars that he signs. What do you remember as a kid them coming over to WCW?
Yeah, I do. I remember everything when we flipped over. I think we just happened to have flipped over in between and saw Scott Hall show up.
Nitro started an hour earlier.
Yeah, but I don't remember which part. I don't know if he was in the 8 o'clock hour or the 9 o'clock hour. I don't remember. I just remember physically watching him on this debuting at this time. Yeah, it was smart. I also think this is a moment too that a lot of people in professional wrestling think is some of the good and bad things. Specifically, this is the birth of the guaranteed contracts, which I think is wise. Like, these people should be getting certain guaranteed contracts. Like, I get guaranteed by my employer to be paid by a certain amount, no matter what my performance is. So it's a huge get. I just think that WWE, how did WWE let them both walk? That's the one part I never I understand. I've seen a bunch of times them talk about it. I still just don't get how they let them walk.
They couldn't pay what Turner was willing to pay them. That's essentially what it came down to.
But we've never heard the dollar. I've never even heard a dollar amount. Like, what was that line? You know what I mean? Because he's going to offer Brett like a 20-year contract the next year.
I think they got $1 million. I think it was in the millions. And Vince McMahon was not capable. He wasn't going to do that because he would have had to start paying everybody that. And that's just not what he did.
Yeah.
These guys were going there for more money than they'd ever made, working less dates. It's a no-brainer. And they both said they didn't really want to leave. But how do you say no to that? You really can't.
Yeah, and from what I've seen of Scott Hall talking about, yes, the money was an issue, but Scott Hall also realized he had hit a glass ceiling. He couldn't move up the card anymore. He was never going to move out of that spot. Diesel, on the other hand, had a baby on the way and all that. He's like, I need the money.
Diesel bypassed a lot of things. He got shot to the main event very, very quickly within a year of being with the company. I think he was signed in 94, and he was the WWF champion before the end of the year. So, I mean, his stock rose very, very quick. But I remember them showing up, and I remember just being like, holy crap, because Lex Luger had already jumped, but I already knew Lex Luger had been WCW. And I knew Hall and Nash had been there too. I remembered the Diamond Stud. I remembered I had Kevin Nash's like card from WCW. I don't remember seeing Oz wrestle, but I kind of vaguely remember him being Vinny Vegas. So, at the time I just thought, oh, okay, they're just going back to where they started. Like I didn't know dirt sheets back then. I didn't know any of that stuff. So when people would just jump over, I was like, oh, I didn't I guess I didn't think much of it. But the way they had these guys debut and the fact that they were the outsiders, I remember just thinking, this is something different than anything I'd seen before.
Yeah, no, it was, and it was smart. It was a smart cat, and this is all Bischoff. I know this seems like we're just going to the WCW, but this is all Bischoff doing this, and he knew how to fight. And I mean, everyone says he always just wrote checks so that a billionaire was cashing. Like, he didn't just write checks; he had to go and get this approved. So it's not like he was just like, "Oh, I have a blank check, just take all the money." It was like, you got to go to someone to approve all this.
I also remember thinking at the time, no way their real names were Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. And then I found out those were their real names. I was like, these guys already have cool names.
Right.
Their actual names were pretty damn cool wrestling names, That was
but that's all about Titan trademarks and stupid
No,
things.
but their names are cool. Like Shawn Michaels' real name is Michael Hickenbottom. That's not a wrestling name.
No.
Hulk Hogan's Terry Bollea. That's not really a cool wrestling name. Like John Cena had a great name. That was his real name. But at the time, I just thought, I remember thinking there's no way that's their real names. And then found out, yes, his name is Kevin Nash. His name is really Scott Hall. If they had some kind of, if they were Scott Bollier, they weren't going to use that name
Right.
for their real name on television. So many things kind of aligned for them.
Yeah, and that's a Bischoff thing too, right? Bischoff has mentioned that Bischoff wasn't overly into creative during this time period. He did have the creative idea of NWO, so like I'll say that, but I don't know if he was directed the guy says, "You're going to be Scott Hall. Keep your name."
So then they get to Bash of the Beach. Now they're going to have this big reveal. Who is the third man? And I remember thinking like, oh my, who is the third man? Like no one could figure it out. And honestly, the thing that should have been staring everybody in the face. Now I'm only 11 years old at the time. I wouldn't have been able to put two and two together. Had to be Hulk Hogan, because if this is going to be an invading group, nobody says WWF like Hulk Hogan. And a lot of rumors, they say that Hogan didn't want to do it. It was going to be Sting. That would not have worked.
No, it might have.
Not as well as this. Let's put it that way.
Probably not as well as this, but because I don't think Sting had the personality that Hogan did. I will say, Dave Meltzer once said Mabel was the third man. So
yeah,
that's what the rumors got.
I don't think that definitely wouldn't have worked. But this to me is going to go down as the greatest heel turn in all of wrestling. I could not believe it. And I knew at 11 years old, wrestling wasn't real. I couldn't believe that Hulk Hogan was going to be a bad guy. And I couldn't wait because I didn't watch the pay-per-view, but he didn't show up on the next Nitro. But I remember being like, I cannot wait to see what this looks like. And
WCW did very well. I don't know. And the story goes that Bischoff flew out because Hogan called him up and says, "I'm going to be a third man" and all that. But they didn't really know up until like the week of who the third man was. Somehow, at this point, Hogan just happens to be filming something else, so he's not on television very often. Like I think his last match before this is uncensored, which is like February. So
he'd already shaved his mustache at one point and he wasn't wearing the red and the yellow at the end of 95. Right. So they were trying the dark side of Hulk Hogan before he actually joined the NWO. And it was kind of a lukewarm reaction.
Right. But for people to say that, we should have known it was going to be Hulk Hogan, it's kind of hard because he's not like his last match is at uncensored with Randy Savage and the Mega Powers. So it's almost like subconsciously, I don't even know if WCW did this on purpose. They just, he wasn't around as much. And then almost in the most WCW thing ever, Bobby the Brain Heenan almost says he's the third man as he's walking down the apron.
Yeah, I know that Bobby Heenan had always been anti-Hogan on commentary, but watching that back and he's saying, "But whose side is he on?" It's like, wait,
what are you doing?
And Dusty Rhodes is like, "What are you talking about?" Because
trying to distract it.
I know that's who. I knew that's who his character was, but in that moment, I really think they should have said, "Bobby, you got to play up that he's not turning." Like
Team WCW.
Everybody was on Team WCW against this NWO, and you're doubting your number one babyface, and he turns and whatever, and he throws trash in the ring, and you fans can stick it. we had never seen the Hulkster talk like this before. Like, it was almost surreal.
He had talked like this in AWA. So he had shown a heel side of himself before. Not to this extent by any means, by the way, but he had been like kind of a heelish person before. Just it had been what 15, 16, 17 years.
It's been a long time. So I mean, most people probably didn't grow up watching. There's some maybe, but like, it's the same thing as like a John Cena. Like, yeah, we'd seen him as heel, but we could never imagine him doing that. And I just this was going to be instant ratings. You had the number one again guy in the world as the babyface, and now you're going to see a heel Hulk Hogan, which is maybe one of the best. Hollywood Hogan maybe is on its own is a Hall of Fame career without everything that he had done prior.
This is also really the way how like the internet is like the big boom for this, because it spread like wildfire about this heel turn. If this happened 5 years earlier, you would have had to wait for programming to catch up for all those people who didn't watch the pay-per-view or wait for dirt sheet paper to come out.
Yeah, dude, this was just so good. But it goes on, and the NWO is just running roughshod, and over time, too many members. But before that, you're always wondering, how did the NWO get into WCW? How is this working? How are they making money? How are they doing this? By the end of '96, it's revealed that the true head of the NWO is the president of WCW, Eric Bischoff. And now we get to see Bischoff, because he was the commentator too on Nitro, and we knew at this point that he was the head of WCW. I'm pretty sure that was pretty clear. He joins the NWO, and now we really get to see him as a character on TV. He does this evil authoritarian character before Mr. McMahon. To be clear, this is before Mr. McMahon.
Yes.
What do you think of this?
I think, and this may be controversial, I think Vince McMahon stole this gimmick from Eric Bischoff 100% and just changed it. It's very smart. It's just almost like, though, who I don't remember, maybe you'll remember, like, who's the face of WCW though from like a management perspective? Ted Turner, like, you know what I mean? Like, he's the owner of both.
They bring in JJ Dillon at some point as like a commissioner role to kind of balance it out. But you know, the next promo Bischoff cuts is like, you're either with us or you're against us. And I was just baffled. I was like, that was great storytelling, because first it looked, the money guy is Ted DiBiase because he was the $1 Million Man. At this point now, DiBiase is going to get phased out.
Yeah,
and it's Eric Bischoff comes up with this heel type character that just makes the NWO even better.
Yeah. Especially he got powerbombed by Kevin Nash before Bash the Beach too. Remember that part? I mean, it was a good reveal, and he's a great on-screen character. Even in this period, like he just had it.
He really does, and that's why WWE will eventually sign him, because really, like, you know, from a C level announcer, C show level announcer to the head to not only the president, but I mean, he was a great on television character as well. And this is where we start to kind of just hit like,
he's arguably the best. He's arguably the best heel in the business at this time.
I would say so. Him and Hogan together. You know, the NWO is this evil group, but like they were the cool heels. So they were cheering them. People wanted to see the NWO. We started to hit the peak of WCW, which I would say 96, 97. WWF starts to finally get back in the game in 98, which they were still doing good. Like, you know, when they're saying they're going out of business, like they were still very popular. Just WCW was more popular at this point. What do you think?
I don't know. I don't believe that WWE was ever really close to going out of business. I don't believe them for a moment.
I'm sure that they were struggling more, but yeah, I don't out of business. That seems a little.
You don't go public that fast. That's just, I don't buy that.
Far-fetched when you still have a TV deal. And
Right.
really, we've learned that
You're close to
TV
going to business.
deals-
You're close to declaring bankruptcy, and you're going to go public in '99. I don't buy that they were close.
they just didn't like being number 2 at this point.
Correct. Yeah.
But then you get to peak WCW here, and a lot goes on. You know, they kept Sting out of the ring for a long time, and I think the peak
Greatest build up
really
ever. That's the greatest build up in wrestling.
the greatest build up. Yeah, you have Sting, and now finally Sting is going to wrestle Hulk Hogan for the WCW title at Starrcade '97. And at this point, they have now things have gone haywire with Bret Hart in WWF. They couldn't pay him. We all know the Montreal Screwjob comes in. Now they have Bret Hart, which doesn't pan out. Is Starrcade '97 kind of like the start of like, we have problems, because they screwed that finish up real bad.
I don't know if it's the start of we got problems. I think that was a creative thing that they just couldn't get on the same page with Hulk Hogan, and I don't know if that's a problem from a business perspective, right? That we're going to probably get into with WCW. It is bad. I just don't. It's just miscommunication.
It was a legit
bad.
3 count. It was a legit 3 count.
But I will say WCW, even at its peak, had these like random screw ups all the time, like random small one-off things that was happening. Like even we just talked about Bobby the Brain Heenan almost basically saying he's the third man walking down there. That's just classic WCW.
Yeah, and that kind of happens. But I mean, they're so hot right now, and you finally have the end of this story, and it gets botched. And
the screw job part at the end too, where like Bret Hart comes out and says, "You're not screwing him over," and he gets the count. Just I don't know. Bret Hart was signed day after Survivor Series. I would have paid whatever it cost to get him there. He has no obligation to WWE. He doesn't have a no compete clause. I would have flown him and had him on WCW Nitro the day after.
Yeah. I mean, they had Rick Rude, but they didn't have Bret Hart.
Yeah.
So they started in the peak too. I'll give Bischoff credit because he okayed this. You have the rise of Bill Goldberg, which I'd say was one of the biggest star that they created, homegrown power plant guy. What did you think of the rise of Goldberg from like '97 into '98?
Yeah, it was cool that they were finally able to create some star, right? I mean, he's now.
And I'm not discounting Sting. I'm kind of talking in this time. Eric Bischoff.
We're just talking this whole period
with
of
him in the head honcho position.
Yeah, I think it was a smart move for him bringing him in and not letting him talk. Right, that was Kevin Sullivan is really the one we really got to give credit to for saying Bill Goldberg won't talk until he's ready and really push that storyline. Because again, Bischoff is part of creative, but a lot of the creative ideas are being ran through a team.
Yes.
No.
Yeah. So Goldberg, do you give Bischoff credit for a lot of his career though, in a way? Not saying he's just the main guy, at the time.
Yeah, I guess I would. You give some credit to Bischoff. I think it's that creative style, and I think Bischoff should get credit for that as well because, like, he is the one who allowed them to do things like that, and he'll have to own the parts that were bad too because he allowed some bad stuff to happen.
And another thing I'll give him credit for, because I say the only DDP, never letting DDP join the NWO was a very smart move. I know Sting joined the Wolfpack, which was like an offshoot, and then when they rejoined, he wasn't part of that. But DDP was another big one in this time. But the rise of Goldberg is
it's crazy.
That was just really good, really well done. They did have him win the title, not on pay-per-view, but on Nitro. Again,
dude, his first win was over huge erection or whatever his name was.
Yeah. And they built him up, and I gotta say, like, that should have been a pay-per-view, but when you're in a ratings war, that's where they wanted to go with it.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a jump fast forward. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. They should have waited because it was days away from the pay-per-view.
Yeah.
If it was difference of like weeks or whatever, fine. You could have still got the big pop of the Georgia Dome of having Goldberg going through all these people to get to the title belt. The problem was they had that tag team match that's going to happen at Bash at the Beach there. That is the reason why it doesn't end up on the main card. That should have been a pay-per-view. I don't care that it was a big pop of ratings.
Well, I understand why they did it for the ratings purposes, because this is the time where the 98's where
They're losing.
WWF started coming back. Like the Austin McMahon stuff's happening. So they're saying, well, Goldberg's our guy. We gotta do this. And I'd have to assume, I don't have it in front of me, that they won the ratings on this night.
No, they did. And they sold out the Georgia Dome in 3 days. So I understand that. And so you got a big house.
And think about this. You're doing the Georgia Dome for a television show. That's pretty incredible in itself.
It's pretty incredible in itself. But you could have booked the Georgia Dome for a pay-per-view or something like that. I don't know. It's just, for me, I get it. It'll always be a moment that'll live in TV history. But it's also a big what if, just like Ric Flair versus Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 8. How anyone at Turner allowed them to do this.
It's not great. So now we're going to enter 99. Before we enter 99, because Bischoff's going to end up getting removed, which is kind of crazy to me to be so successful. But a lot of people believe this is the moment where people stop flipping to Nitro as much. You had Mick Foley winning the WWF title. Bischoff gave the okay to spoil it, and he hadn't been doing those spoilers. He hasn't been doing those spoilers in years. And they said, Mick Foley, that's really going to put the butts in the seats. On the flip side, you do the finger poke doom, your fans feel a little ripped off. Is this the beginning of like the creative issue? Like there was creative issues before, but this is like the creative issue that we're all now seeing right up in our face.
It's even before this. I mean, I understand that a lot of the internet fans and the toxic IWC loves to point this one out. It makes sense if Goldberg doesn't get hurt. Like, you're building him back up, just like that's how WWE would do it, with Austin losing the belts and things like that. That just rebuilding up. But Goldberg gets hurt pretty fast, and now you've put together a group that it doesn't make any sense. The figure poke of doom then looks bad at that time. There could have been things that benefit from this if things outside of their parameters didn't happen.
I don't see, but my thing is you can't be. Injuries are part of wrestling, and you have to be.
Well, he put his hand through a window, so it wasn't like an injury in the ring. He cut his forearm all the way down when he punched the glass because he was too green.
I just think this is just a very poorly planned out. Didn't think it through. I would have had Goldberg retain at Starrcade. I don't think it was time for him to lose the title, because once he loses,
I don't know. I mean, they were booing him. They were booing him in places.
He still was pretty hot. I just don't think I don't think that was the time, and I don't think it was Kevin Nash to be the one to do it.
Yeah.
I think
who would have been on it?
I would have gone with DDP, a face versus face thing, because they had
October?
that. No, I would have had if I was going to do it at Starrcade, I would have gone with DDP. They went with Nash, but the thing was with the finger poke of doom, they were just saying this title doesn't mean anything to Nash, and he just beats Goldberg. And now he's losing.
Or they're saying his friendship and bond to Hulk Hogan is more important than the title, but the title is not important.
But do wrestling fans want to see that? I don't. Obviously
wrestling fans are so fickle, anyways.
No, I think this is just bad creative. And while the other company is doing phenomenal creative, you know what I mean?
Phenomenal end of the card creative in WWE. There's a lot of crap in WWE.
No, I know, but
a lot of credit
in the Monday Night War, I think your main event was a big piece of it.
Yeah.
So I think this is the start of because they go into 99 and they're not hot. They're not hot anymore. He's gonna get fired by September of that year.
They were cooled off by middle of 98, by the August of 98.
I still think there was a lot of potential though in that company.
Not anymore. They were booked so far out, right? They're looking at their dollars and cents of what's coming in from year to year. And by 98, they're running out of ideas. By the middle of 98,
they're also not creating anybody. They're not creating new stars, and you have to have that fresh.
You had too many top talent.
You had too many, and you had a lot of creative control and stuff, but they were handcuffed in so many ways. Like when they say the WCW is the death of 1,000 cuts, that I agree.
Yeah.
This was bad, and then they didn't regroup, and the NWO quietly disassembles in 99. Like, I don't remember when it happened or how the NWO was done, but by the summer, Hulk Hogan's back to wearing the red and the yellow. Ratings are down, and Bischoff is let go. And it's like, oh my God, 3 years prior, this guy had just revolutionized this company, and now he's being removed. That's
Right.
crazy to think about.
But there's also more factors going on at this point. This is at the point where Ted Turner and his organization is looking to have some type of merger and move forward and go public with this company in a different way. Right? They're looking for suitors.
I agree with that, but if you're as hot as you were, you're not getting removed. You're just not.
Who knows? Who knows? We don't really know. It's just such a different, especially with he did not do well in the corporate environment. And the more you get closer to trying to sell the business, the more corporate it's going to get, especially the eyes looking at it.
Yeah, I still think, though, if you're as hot as you were, which nothing lasts forever, you know, you're not getting removed.
The ratings are still better than AEW's right now, by the way.
Yeah, but it was a different time period, obviously. So in 99, he gets removed. Vince Russo kind of doesn't want to work in WWF anymore. They bring Russo over to WCW. It is a short run, okay, and Russo doesn't work out. They remove him. They give it back to Kevin Sullivan, and then by May, they decide, let's try Russo and Bischoff together, and Bischoff agrees to come back and work with Vince Russo. And the first thing they do is they strip the titles and they put themselves on television. WCW had hyped up big time that I can't believe they did this on television, that their creative team was changing. I don't think your creative team needs to be publicized on television. I just don't. But they come in, they make themselves authority figures and the new blood. And Bischoff is back. He's with Russo. And this is just not going to last very long.
No. And by the way, this is how stupid Ted Turner's organization was. They paid Eric Bischoff to leave, and to bring him back, they had to pay out his old contract, renegotiate, and pay him more. So it's just this organization outside of just WCW is terrible.
Mismanagement. I don't think, you know, and even if the creative was bad or whatever was going, I would not have let go of a guy. And I know he was arguing with them a lot. I would not have let go of the guy that got you there.
No, and honestly, Bischoff just probably needed time off. He was burnt out. Like, this is not an easy organization to work for. There's a reason why AOL Time Warner doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, no, and so this doesn't work out. We've talked about, you know, Bash of the Beach happens. I think that's the end of Bischoff. That's the end of Hogan. And creatively, I know that you don't believe that. You just believe that it was just because of the merger, which I can vouch for that. But the creative is at an all-time low. The television show is at an all-time low, and WCW's not going to last. They're running out, and then Bischoff tries to buy the company and is successful without TV time. Do you think Bischoff could have resurrected WCW if he would have gotten the TV time?
Potentially, without the handcuffs of an overlord like the AOL Time Warner, maybe. I mean, there still would be some type of impact. But yeah, without a TV deal, WCW isn't worth anything. And AOL Time Warner, very quickly, when that merger finally completes, it's an absolute, pardon my French, shit show. And that's why AOL Time Warner is one of the worst mergers in the history of the United States, and that's what WCW was acquired by. So yeah, he maybe could have resurrected. TNA could have been a style of like that NWA TNA style is probably what he would have gone for, like bringing in the NWA to bring some type of prestige or something like that around it. But again, AOL Time Warner is the worst merger in the history of the United States, and that's who their overlord was.
Yeah, I think if he would have bought it, it would have lasted a couple more years. But I think he's even talked about it, like no one's ever been in the fight for as long as Vince McMahon. And you look at all the, like, 'cause, you know, Tony Khan, if he's going to last as long, like he's going to have to stay with this for a long time. And you've seen even with TNA, like it's still here, right? So maybe someone else buys it. I don't think Bischoff would have been around for 20 years if it did happen.
No, and I don't know if he would have been like what we're thinking of. Oh, he's gonna come in and do creative like that. I think he would have been a partner for the majority of the shareholders, right? The face on that side, not the face on TV. So he might have bought it, brought in people to fix creative, keep the contracts. He would have had to cut fat and things like that. But it is manageable. It could have been manageable.
Yeah, and it's a shame. So WCW folds in 2001, and then by 2002, they need fresh faces. A lot of people are done with their contracts. WWF is trying to shake things up. They brought in Hall, they brought in Nash, they brought in Hogan, they brought in Mr. Perfect, they brought in all types of different people, ECW people too. But in 2002, Vince McMahon gets on the phone, calls Eric Bischoff to be what we said. He's a great television character. Has him come in to be the Raw general manager. What did you think of Bischoff coming in here?
I loved it. I'll be honest. This is the time period for me where I'm in and out of wrestling. Right, 2005 to 2011 is the time where I was up and down. I do go back and watch some of this, and it's good. He's awesome. He just looks like he's enjoying himself on television.
Yeah, he just had to show up and work and just be an on TV character. He did a great job. I was 2002. I didn't watch weekly, but I did see this episode, and I remember that him coming out being like, "I can't, but that's crazy."
Mhm.
And I didn't know all the backstage, and I knew he called out Vince McMahon in '98 to a fight or whatever. But I remember thinking like, wow, him showing up really made it feel like WCW is. I know it was already dead, but like that was like surreal. Like this thing is dead. It's dead as
Yeah,
it
it
ever
was
can be.
it was surreal. I mean, they own the rights to WCW, so it's fitting that he showed up there, right? At some point, it is nice. Vince McMahon is a scumbag. Don't get me wrong, but it is nice that he at least gave the offer to bring in Bischoff, especially after Bischoff was like on all those stations saying, "I'm going to put Vince McMahon out of business."
Yeah, it proves that Vince puts business first, and Bischoff did a great job. He did a great job co-general managers. They brought Austin back in 2003 because he had walked out right before Bischoff had got there, and yeah, a lot of great stuff. And he eventually does leave in 2005. Does some work with TNA. Comes in with Hulk Hogan. Um, I don't think there's a lot to discuss here. I think he was a good addition for them. But I think TNA's lost its way because it wasn't like the TNA it was before they got there. And I don't think a lot of fans were looking for what they were pushing. He does get his son Garrett Bischoff a wrestling contract. Um, any thoughts on the TNA stuff?
I don't. What is this the TNA the first stop in 2003 when he's there, or are we talking
No,
about
this
like
is
his
he
whole
goes to
TNA run?
TNA. This is 2010, so he's out of WWF
Okay,
for
okay, yeah,
5 years. Him and Hogan debut, and they have the idea that they're going to go head to head with Raw again, which was just that did not last very long. I don't know if that was a Hogan idea or obviously it went through everything had to go through Dixie Carter, but I think it was Hogan's idea. He came in with Bischoff. They brought in a lot of old guys. They said this is a new era or whatever it was, and I remember the Nasty Boys showing up and Val Venus showing up on that one, and I said, okay, these guys they don't have it, or they don't get what what people are why people watch TNA. I guess they
yeah.
weren't watching TNA to see a WWF. They were looking at TNA as something different. And
Yeah,
I
they
think
want to see the
Hogan,
six-side ring.
yeah, and I felt like Hogan and Bischoff, in whatever role they were, they had some influence. I just don't think that they understood what that company was.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And it's just kind of unfortunate because there was so much talent there, but it was like those like Kurt Angle's there and had some of his best matches during this time period.
Absolutely,
Um,
there were high points. I mean, whoever idea it was to put AJ Styles in Ric Flair's robe and try to make him like a Ric Flair was
dumb.
horrendous,
Yeah.
horrendous. you know, so that lasts for he was there when Jeff Hardy had his incident. Bischoff was the one to go to the ring to get him out. But not a lot to really talk about. The Aces and Eights was great. I don't know. And again, I think Bruce Pritchard's part of this company at this point too.
Yeah, he is.
Vince Russo. So they got a lot of different moving pieces here. And
Cornette was there at some point too.
yeah, I'm not sure exactly what Eric Bischoff's role was, but he was an on-air character, very similar to what he did in WWF.
He was not involved in creative at all, by the way, during this. So just so people are listening, he's not involved in creative at all. It's all around Hulk Hogan. Anything that Bischoff is around and involved in is the Hulk Hogan stuff.
Yeah.
And he plays a character on TV.
So not a lot to write home there, honestly. No. But he does get his bid for the WWE Hall of Fame. What do you think of that? No,
it was overdue. I think he was definitely a mark on wrestling and should be in the Hall of Fame. It's unfortunate. This isn't COVID. This is a COVID WrestleMania.
Yeah, I think it's great that him and Paul Heyman are both in now. Eric Bischoff did something no one else had ever done. He got into the trenches. He fought with Vince McMahon, beat him in ratings for 83 weeks and some other weeks. That was 83 in a row. I think he won some others. But the fact that they were an actual threat to WWF has not been seen and may never be seen again. But I think he is, for that, a Hall of Famer. But we got to talk about it because he was a great on-air talent. He wasn't just the president of WCW. He was a fantastic on-air character.
And he's only a one-time Hall of Famer, right? This is just as part of the NWO, right?
No, he has his own. He has his own.
So he's a two-time Hall of Famer?
He didn't go in. Well, if you want to put him part of the NWO, he was not.
Maybe he was not. Okay, he wasn't.
He didn't go up on the stage. It was.
Hogan, you're right. It was X-Pac.
X-Pac.
Who I don't understand why he was in it, but
I don't know who else.
Be real.
But yeah, we're getting towards the end here. I just want to talk about this real quick. What do you think of his criticisms nowadays of Tony Khan? Jesus, Tony.
I think it's fair. I mean, no one in the world can talk of being in those shoes that Tony's in now like Eric Bischoff. No one in the world. And Tony Khan, no matter how much he wants to talk about Wembley, doesn't matter, has never beaten WWE. Eric Bischoff has. And I know some of the talks of the IWC will mention he beat NXT. NXT, no offense, will never be on the same line as Raw or SmackDown. And Tony Khan has never gone head-to-head with those, and he never will. There's a reason why he's on Wednesday nights.
Yeah, NXT is just developmental. It's a good show, but it's not something that's the hardcore base. And AEW was new and fresh when they were going head-to-head.
But he's got his placating to a small, toxic, not great part of the audience is just hurting him. And they have too many people. And I think Eric Bischoff is right to be criticizing him.
I think he should have hired Bischoff as some kind of advisor or some kind of role, even if, I just think that Tony is just a guy who's no different. And again, Bischoff, he did what he did. I mean, what was his credentials when he got that position? But he did it, and he did it well. For a time, I think it's fair to say that AEW was hot for 3 years, which is kind of how hot WCW was. But I will say this, like, the criticisms that Eric Bischoff gives that company, I generally agree with.
Yeah. I will say this, though, if you're going to compare the two, AEW and WCW about being hot, if WCW was on TNT and handed NBA players their world heavyweight title as a gift, they would know what that title is. When they did it this week with the AEW and they gave the people on TNT, Draymond Green looked at it and was seeing it going, what the hell is this? Not knowing what AEW is.
Yes, AEW's never been WCW hot, and I don't want to compare it that way.
Yeah.
But they did have a hot run as far as like being a wrestling company, but not to the levels of WCW.
Yeah. They have done well on pay-per-view.
But I think Tony should stop worrying about what Eric Bischoff says and just worry about his company. I don't think he should be calling out Eric Bischoff. Eric Bischoff's at a point in his life where he's not working television stuff. If he wants to do a podcast like everybody else is doing, and he wants to criticize your company, tough shit.
Right.
Don't cry about it, because every time Tony responds, he just looks like a big giant crybaby. Why can't Eric Bischoff at this stage in his life have a show where he can say his, he's not stopping him, but why are you responding to? He's a fan now. He's a podcaster. who's actually worked in the business. It's just like Bully Ray. It's just like anybody else. He has his right to do it, and you don't need to cry about it. That's the only thing. Like Tony always comes off looking way worse when he goes after Bischoff than before.
Yeah. Or when he goes off after anything on Twitter.
It's pathetic. And I think Eric has nailed a lot on his head. And to be honest, I'm sure 83 weeks gets a lot of views when he's calling out AEW. And then you watch AEW and you hear what he says and you go, he's right.
Makes sense to me. Yeah, he's right.
So I enjoy it. I enjoy the commentary. I'm so glad that he has a podcast. I'm glad that he's out there. Eric Bischoff is someone that I will say that I am a fan of.
Yeah.
Not just for what he did behind the scenes, but like I said, as a character in wrestling. What's the legacy of Eric Bischoff?
He beat Vince McMahon, and no one else on this earth can say that. And his legacy is that he gave to wrestling, and people will always remember what he did.
I agree, and I would say he will be remembered as someone that was a part of the Monday Night War, a huge part of it, and was part of the hugest boom of wrestling that I have ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
And he should be known as someone with guts.
Yeah. He shaped professional wrestling, what professional wrestling is today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, all right. Well, that's enough on Eric Bischoff this week. We are fans of Eric Bischoff. This was a lot of fun to do. If we had more time, we could even go in deeper on a lot of this stuff. But no, Bobby, really appreciate you coming on tonight. And anything you guys want us to talk about, put it in the comments, and we'll see you next time.